friends, and thank you for joining us on Charting the Way Forward, where we deliver research-informed strategy and intelligence from across the Democratic coalition. This podcast is produced by Way to Win. I'm your host, Kerry Eleveld, and today I am joined by
Tory Gavito, co-founder and president of Way to Win.
Jenifer Fernandez Ancona, co-founder and chief strategy officer of Way to Win.
And
Okay. Oh, sorry, Celinda.
Celinda Lake.
I'm gonna talk right over you. We've got
Okay.
Celinda Lake on the line, man, and she's coming in hot. She's ready to go. But today we have a banger of a show. We're releasing a new poll of 2020 Biden voters who skipped the 2024 election. And the survey provides some surprising results as well as a clear path forward to winning back this critical part of the Democratic coalition. And as you may have surmised, listeners, to help break it all down, we have veteran Democratic pollster Celinda Lake, who conducted the poll for us. Celinda is the founder and president of Lake Research, was one of the main pollsters and a senior advisor to President Biden in 2020 when we won, by the way. And she has provided strategic advice to all kinds of progressive groups such as the AFL-CIO, the SEIU, Planned Parenthood, Vote Vets, HRC, and of course, Way to Win. Here we are. So thank you for joining us, Celinda.
Thank you for having me. I couldn't be more pleased.
All right. Well, we are going to get right into it here. We ran into some tech issues, but I think we've got it worked out. So hopefully this will go smoothly for everyone. I want to start out with a big picture question to Celinda. This, of course, is, as I said, our vote skippers. It's a poll of the people who voted in 2024 or 2020 for Biden, but skipped 2024. And Celinda, I want to know how Democrats are faring with this particular group of voters.
Well, this is the most exciting data that we have done in a long time, in part because it defies all conventional wisdom and validates what Way to Win has been saying for a long time. And the first thing we find is that these voters did not vote in 2024, and they recognize that they didn't vote, but they still like Democrats. They don't like MAGA Republicans. They dislike Trump intensely, and they just want to vote for a choice, and they refuse to participate for the lesser of two evils. So if we do our job and offer a populist economic message, these voters will churn out.
All right, fantastic. So, right. There's a clear path forward here. We're going to get into some of the, some more details. We're going to fill out some details around it. But Jenifer, one of the big things is that even though these voters are clearly winnable in this poll, they can't be taken for granted. They skipped the last election to disastrous effect. So what can Democrats do to make sure that these voters are motivated enough to get back to the polls?
Yeah, well, I think it's a few things that, so like Celinda mentioned, there's clearly a hunger for a more populist narrative and story, and also leaders who embody that kind of populism. So it's very motivating, I think, for this voter group that we found in our poll to really hear a real story about why are things hard and who is to blame. They tend to blame big corporations and wealthy tax cheats who are taking away money from the kind of programs that they support. So I think that is motivating. The other thing that's definitely motivating, which we can talk more about, but the agenda that the Republicans and under Trump have been pushing is very unpopular with this group of voters. And they talked about in the polling, we could see how the kinds of things that Trump is doing, almost everything that the Trump regime has been doing since taking office this year was named by the voters as actually motivating them to vote for Democrats the most. So it was getting affordable health insurance for those who need it. I'm sorry. I'm talking about the wrong thing. What I meant to say was the regrets that the voters had were around not voting was more lined up with all the things that Trump and Republicans are doing. So when we asked them, like, what what things that Trump is doing make you most regret voting, the things that rose to the top are all the things that Trump's administration is doing. So, cutting programs that help children and seniors, doing nothing to lower prices and working families' cost of living, and implementing tariffs that make prices go up, putting billionaire positions in positions of power. All of these are things that he's doing. So that is one way to motivate them. And then the second piece that I was talking about before is the positive issues, like the things that Democrats can stand for that actually motivate them in a positive way. And those were things like getting affordable health insurance, strengthening enforcement against tax cheats and making the wealthy pay what they owe in taxes, which we'll talk more about, and bringing prices back down, stopping price gouging, making it easier to afford rent. So those are all the things that we have talked about a lot on the show of like, this has to be the agenda for the Democrats. And the polling that we have with these skippers shows this is part of what can re-motivate them.
That's right. That's great. When I looked at this poll and when Celinda, presented some of the findings to us, I started to think, God, it relative to like swing voters and disaffected voters, these voters in particular are uniquely winnable, and also a foundational building block to reconstituting a sustainable winning coalition for Democrats. And some of the things that make them uniquely winnable, partly as Celinda suggested, Democrats they view Democrats favorably, and a lot of the issues they care about fit right in our wheelhouse, as Jen suggested. They also are they follow political news very closely. 75% of them said that they follow the political news, which is makes them like not disaffected or news avoidant. They're also not really Trump curious in any way. So it confirmed something that came up in our battleground focus group of skippers, that they're just not unreachable. And it's more like they are waiting to be persuaded. They were not persuaded in 2024. So, Tory, as Democrats reeled following 2024, you made an early push at Way to Win to study the Biden skippers. Does this poll feel life affirming to you? Because it felt life affirming to me, frankly.
Yes, and I mean, I just I just think it's really important as a coalition of people who want to save America, whose like job it is not just to talk about politics, but to actually advise donors, move resources, develop strategies, research those strategies, implement them with, all kinds of actors from, organizers in the streets to creators online. Like we have to be serious about what went wrong and what went right, and we really needed data for this to understand that. And it's such a nuanced conversation. And so, I mean, I went in very open-minded. Like if the data was going to tell us woke was broke, okay, we could figure that out, right? Like if the data was going to tell us that this slippery slope towards Trump was much steeper than we all anticipated, and a lot of folks were just super Trumpy. Like, we need to actually understand that to understand the path forward. But that's not what the data is telling us at all, despite conventional wisdom. I think this is why Celinda used this term. Like, there was a rush to tell a story in mainstream press and to, you know, Democratic Party leaders around what happened that was not fully nuanced about what's happening really with our coalition of voters. And it's not good, by the way. Like it is not good to see young people. We're gonna, I think, probably see some slides here in a minute about what young people are telling us about third parties or how Latinos are still among maybe the kind of most grumpy still about congressional Democrats. Like, it's not a rosy picture, but it's a much more specific one that gets to the heart of why people decided to stay home. It wasn't, the noise about kind of a identity politic or a ideological politic. It was literally who is going to fight for me so that I have a better way of life soon. It was a very economic based decision.
Yeah. Agreed. But, along the lines that you're just mentioning here with some of the initial takes, not, be needing to be more nuanced. I mean, I just have to say that a lot of times initial takes, all the hot takes that come out within the first like week or two of the, election, it's very common, of course, that they turn out once we get all the data in, it doesn't all line up. One of those takes is the pundit class has kind of adopted a general perception or conception that if more people had voted, it would have benefited Trump. And the distinction we keep making is that we need to persuade more of our voters to the polls. And these skippers are a prime example. More than half, 56%, say they would have voted for Harris, while just 25% said Trump, and 13% said third party. So they would have helped Harris, and their profile makes them prime targets versus, say, swing voters or disaffected voters, as I mentioned before. Um, so let's revisit 2024 and what really didn't work for Harris. We gave participants a battery of questions about Harris's positions and candidate traits and what most impacted their decision not to vote for her. Jenifer, the top two reasons popped for you specifically. She didn't have a strong enough plan to bring down the cost of living, and she was solely focused on home buyers and the middle class rather than addressing deeper issues like poverty and inequality. Harris put a lot of effort into highlighting her economic agenda. So, what went wrong here as you think? I mean, she was trying to connect on the economy. What went wrong here in your opinion?
Yeah, I'll jump in, but then I definitely want to hear from Celinda as well, and Tori if you have more thoughts. But I think what is kind of interesting about this is that so we got this data back and we asked people to choose the top issue, right, that caused them to not vote in 2024. And when the option of she didn't have a strong enough plan to get the cost of living down, that was the top choice. And that was, of course, the conventional wisdom. And everybody said it was all about prices, it's all about prices. That's all people cared about was prices. But the second choice, top choice, which was almost tied in terms of the number of people who chose it, was that she didn't actually address these deeper issues like poverty and inequality. And we wrote that because of what we heard in the focus groups from the battleground voters who were telling us, all I heard her talk about was middle class tax cuts. I didn't hear her talk about these issues that are affecting me, like inequality and deeper poverty. And so I thought it was really interesting that among the skipper group, those two options rose to the top because they gave equal weight to those things. Yes, people cared about of living and prices, but these voters actually wanted her to address the larger economic issues, and she never really was able to in the campaign. That story didn't land and didn't come across. And as we've talked about before, it felt like a grab bag of policies. It didn't feel like a story that they were hearing about how she was going to address the larger economic struggles that people have been having for decades, not just this past year with inflation. So that's what I took away. But I'm curious what others think.
Well, Jen, I think you're exactly right. I think two other things I would point out is that we offered the categories that were the woke categories. If you were support for transgender rights, she was too cozy with liberals. And only 10% and 9% picked that. Significantly more voters picked something around the economic piece or fighting and being on my side. So not only were the economic messages she had weren't breaking through, the economic messages she had were not populist enough. And I think that's true for the whole Biden Harris ticket. And in 2020, Biden won these voters by being quite populist and talking about increasing taxes on the wealthiest to invest in things like the CHIPS program and infrastructure. So this was a sharp departure from what had been talked about in terms of equality and deeper economic issues in 2020 when these voters turned out.
Yeah. One of the things that we noticed also is that there was a high number of people who said none of the above on the issues, and I know we talked about that before. It could be interpreted in a different way. Celinda, I feel like you had brought something up, I feel like, around that, where it's like, maybe we just didn't name an issue people cared about, but also it seemed like it wasn't really about issues as much for people. Is that what you would say?
Yes, I would say that it's having this high and none of the above was it really showed is about character. And in fact, the third highest was leadership. And of course, women candidates, people of color, have extra burden to overcome in demonstrating these characteristics. But we know that 50% of the vote is determined by party, 40% by character, and only 10% by issue. Now,
Mm.
issues can sometimes reveal character and values, but I think a lot of people were voting strength. And we did in other research that we've done, we found that the problem for Democrats was much more that they were perceived to be too weak rather than they were perceived to be too liberal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I should add here, just going a little bit off script, that we also asked what impacted people's decision not to vote in 2024, and this is something that came up in the focus groups as well. There's the obvious, which you hear all the time. They didn't like either candidate. Was the lesser of two evils. That was the biggest cohort of people who said that impacted their decision not to vote. But the second was my vote wouldn't have made a difference in the outcome. And so I just wanted to bring that up. They weren't necessarily issues that are related to, Harris specifically, but and the policies that she was putting forward. But the idea that, I mean, the reason I'm stuck on the wouldn't have made a difference in the outcome is that these are Republican talking points, right? Is like pushing this narrative that your vote wouldn't make a difference anyways. And, Democrats never get anything done. Your life hasn't changed in the past, you know, 20 years or whatever when Democrats have been at the helm. So I don't know if you want to add anything there, Celinda.
Well, I would just add, on top of what you're saying, which I think is really right. I think none of the above also is a surrogate for sexism and racism.
Mm.
And, when Harris was first nominated, and I was a huge advocate for a woman VP, very excited, desperate to get a woman president. And I think we've had two of the most qualified women possible running. But I said to myself, do people understand how hard it is going to be in 107 days to elect a woman of color president? So misogyny and racism in the interaction of the two were big factors. And I think a lot of that is sitting in none of the above as well.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Okay. Let's move on to some of the favorability scores. MAGA Republicans, or people call them MAGA. For some reason, I just always call them MAGA, and I don't know why.
It's
Are
MAGA.
what?
It's MAGA.
It's MAGA, right? I don't know why I can't get myself to do it, but they're deeply underwater with every skipper demographic we tested. Democrats in Congress also fare quite well overall, as we mentioned up top. But they are by far the weakest with Latinos, congressional Democrats. They're just 3 points above water. So, Tory, I know you found that particularly compelling. Can you talk a little bit about that and what it means for us at Way to Win?
Sure. So I I just think it's I think the Latino vote is the most fascinating question we should all be concerned about. Whether you are thinking about taking about back the House in 26, I mean, the path is going to run through heavily Latino gerrymandered districts. I mean, Latino voters get gerrymandered a lot because folks are banking on they're not voting, or now this slide. I mean, the whole Texas special session is kind of predicated on Trump believing he can squeeze more Latino votes out of the Valley, for example, in South Texas. And so the Latino vote just feels incredibly important, not just for the short term, but the long term, given demographic change. And my God, are we not learning that Latinos are a swing persuasion target? That, I mean, I have Jen once, we would want to rip our hair out. I mean, we've been in rooms where we have literally fought tooth and nail to get hard dollars into programs that are persuasive programs for Latinos, and people still just are sort of like, why don't we just, tell them when it's time to vote and they'll just vote the right way naturally. Like we're just all just born Democrats or something. And so I think it's important to show that Latinos continue to have concerns. And I think that this is the year. Way to Win is working with a number of groups. I don't want to get out of my in front of my skis just yet, but to test some thinking about Latino persuasion in New Jersey in the off cycle so that we can have some basis on which we can do better persuasion in the next cycle. So I don't know. I think the Latino question is the question for Democrats for the future, period.
Yeah. And Celinda, you also found a distinction between testing Republicans and testing MAGA Republicans. Tell us about that.
Yeah, people are more negative toward MAGA Republicans. It doesn't make any difference for Democrats, but it does make a big difference for independents. It makes a difference for soft Republicans too, are pretty unhappy with the way things are going, but still consider themselves Republicans. And MAGA is what is really in charge of all of these draconian and dangerous policies that are being passed. And MAGA is the one that's really behind using the money and cutting it from states, Republican states, to have more Medicaid recipients than blue states do, to give another, not a new, an additional tax break to the people already cheating on their taxes and not paying what they owe, the wealthiest 1%.
Okay. Yeah. So during the briefing, Celinda was like, use MAGA Republicans all the time. We should just use MAGA
That's right.
Republicans. Yeah. All right. We had a worldview question that we test in almost every survey we do. So for those who listen to us regularly, it won't be news to them. Here we tested two separate messages that account for the problems the country is currently facing. The first is having an economic system where the richest 1% have taken $50 trillion in wealth from the 90% of Americans over the past few decades through tax cuts, privatized healthcare, squashing unions, and dividing us by our differences. The second worldview is more of a Republican frame, pinning our problems to out of control government spending, too many immigrants coming here, going too far with wokeness and DEI and rights for transgender people. So 72% of the Biden skippers chose the 50 trillion, the wealth transfer explanation as the root cause of the problems. 20% chose rampant government spending, immigrants, trans folks, DEI as the root cause. So the $50 trillion message, which actually has been recalculated since we wrote it to $79 trillion being siphoned away from the 90%, it performed especially well with female skippers, under 30 skippers, and battleground skippers. That was where it was performed. It performed highest. I also wanted to run over in terms of which politicians are popular and known. And there's more echoes here from our focus groups. Bernie Sanders came in real hot at 78% favorable. This is something we heard in a lot of focus groups, followed by AOC at 67%. Democrats in Congress at 64%. This was one of those surprising numbers that we talked about. We tested several state governors, Gavin Newsom at 60% favorable, Gretchen Whitmer at 50%. Tory, I know you found this slide quite interesting. Do you want to weigh in?
Well, I actually want to ask you guys the question. So I want to kind of get behind the curtain or whatever, go behind the scenes and share that I'm getting a lot of questions from maybe older donors or, folks that are like just perceiving this for the first time and thinking, oh my gosh, yikes. Like it's a little nerve-wracking for some people to think like the best communicators about the stakes up front of us are Bernie and AOC because they're just so maligned by sort of the establishment of the party and some of the press. And I'm just curious, like, What would you say to them? What would you say to people that are like, ooh, I don't know, this is scary? What is this data telling us about why we might want to embrace it?
Celinda, I think that's a call to you.
Well, thank you. And as pollster for AOC, I feel very happy to answer this question. First of all, a lot of people, the people that are worried about Bernie and AOC as the spokespeople for our party, are the same people that think our problem is being too woke. And I think we've shown some pretty convincing data that, at least for these Biden skippers, it's way more not having an economic plan and not being strong enough in fighting for economics than being too woke. And in fact, the best answer to being accused of being too woke is to answer with an economic message, which both Bernie and AOC do. Secondly, we should understand how voters see these two. They see them as fighters. They see them as willing to take on powerful special interests. They see them as calling out the truth. They see them as having specific economic proposals. And if you're afraid of these two being the spokesperson for the party, then let's get all of our spokespeople for the party on this message, because it happens to be a winning message. It's the message that brought out millions of people on No King's Day. It's the message that has won the special elections, have been quite populist in their economic messaging. And I think, and we have to get these voters out. This is the margin of defeat. These Biden skippers is the margin of defeat. We must get them out in 2026, and they're in wait and see mode. They're going to wait and see what we have to offer. They're going to wait and see what we have to say. They're going to wait and see who we're going to fight for.
So, for example, if there were a candidate who decided to join an oligarchy tour and the donor was feeling a little nervous about it, it's like, it's, and part of the rationale is like, well, those voters are in the bag already. They're going to vote for the Democrat. We don't actually know that to be true anymore. Like the voter would just as likely stay home too. I mean, that's what we're
Or vote
learning.
third party.
Or vote third party, which is what we're learning from this. Yeah. So that's helpful. I appreciate
Yeah, I mean, we saw, and it's not just hypothetical, right? These voters did sit home.
Right.
Those same donors say these voters have nowhere to go. Yes, they do, home. And that's where they went. And then, even particularly among the Latino voters, only half of them, their vote is way under their party identification. They are really in enough of this jabberwocky. You need to prove it. You need to fight for me. They're really the show me the money voters now.
Yeah, I agree. I would just jump in and say too that we've seen in a lot of data, not just this Skipper poll, but other polling we've done, Celinda, over the past couple of years, that the surge voters, the voters that we really need to come back in the coalition, they really respond to a very strong populist message. So I think that's why it's not that surprising that Bernie and AOC get such high ratings, because those are two of our most known politicians who really embody that message. It's not that they just say that message. I mean, Bernie's been saying it for 50 years, so it's part of his whole identity and who he is. And both of them are just very consistent, and they're also very unapologetic and unafraid to talk about it, in the same way that we saw with Mamdani, when people are very concerned that he's a socialist for the mayor of New York race, and he leaned into that, and he didn't run away from it, right? It's that kind of authenticity and sort of people sticking to their truth of what they believe, that these voters are looking for, because they are so fed up with the system the way that it is, and they are so fed up with a kind of politics as usual. So, I mean, we see in this polling that Gavin Newsom, Gretchen Whitmer have a lot more high unknowns. People may not have heard of them or know of them as well as they do the other two, but we also did focus groups with 80 voters, in the battleground states. And that's why we chose these people to put in the poll, because their names kept coming up over and over again when we just asked open ended, who are the politicians that you most relate to?
it.
So I agree that we don't have to be afraid of them, but we should be understanding why they're popular with this group, and understand that that's what voters want our whole party to be embodying in many ways.
It's also true that both Bernie and AOC embrace a sort of everything everywhere all at once media diet kind of
Hmm.
Mm.
program, which I think we'll see in another section about just like how many different platforms where people are getting their information.
Hmm.
Yeah. Actually, we were going to turn to media diet next. There were some interesting findings on media diet here. And I agree with what you're saying, Tori, for sure. Um, uh, One problem that, Democrats had in 24 alongside messaging was reach. And this was kind of, I don't know, I just thought this was interesting and maybe a touch counterintuitive, but the top six news sources for these folks were in order: YouTube, cable shows like CNN and MSNBC, Facebook, news sites like Apple News and New York Times, TikTok, and Twitter. Okay. But the media diet, there was a twist because the would-be Trumper, Trump voters and the would-be Harris voters had different consumption habits. Now remember, this is just for the Biden skippers, right? But Celinda, would you be game to walk us through the differences? Can you see that slide? You have that
Oh,
available
yeah,
to you? Yeah.
I can totally see it. Well, first off the bat, one of the things that one of the biggest lessons, and this is so great because I think this is the first data that's really broken it out. And as I said before, this is a very hard population to go get. So kudos to Way to Win to not just buying into conventional wisdom, but actually going out and getting the answers from the people. So we have seen in our data a huge surge in use of YouTube. And you can see here the red lines are Republican and Trump use of it. The blue lines are Democratic use. We are being outmaneuvered on YouTube in very, very, very serious numbers. And this is the fastest growing top news outlet right now. The second are cable shows. We're holding our own. The Republicans are falling off of Fox and going to more narrow cable news. Um, Facebook still dominated by older voters and a lot of everybody on Facebook, frankly. And then news websites. The news websites are really, really strong with Democrats. TikTok, TikTok, believe it or not, we are getting outbought and outgunned by the Republicans. And I don't think, I think people think that we're the ones who dominate that medium. You want to understand why Trump got so many young voters? It was in part their aggressive use of TikTok. And in fact, they're losing younger voters right now. It's a great time to be on TikTok. The other thing about TikTok is very, very strongly favored by the people who want a third party. And then finally, Twitter and X obviously dominated by Republicans right now. So there are a lot of lessons here. It is a very, very fast changing landscape, and we are getting outmaneuvered and outused on some of these mediums and need to get going, particularly on YouTube and particularly for third party and independents on streaming.
I mean, the talk of the town has been the right's dominance across media ecosystems, but I think this third party stuff should be
Mm-hmm.
way more of a red flag. Like, especially, I don't know, remember early in last cycle, there was a lot of concern about seeing the rise of like non-party affiliated voter register folks or this kind of thing, and people saying, oh, maybe it's just truly because they're independent, and there was just a lot of like, oh, maybe it's not such a big deal. But I think the third party indicator was one of the very first indicators that trust was starting to erode away from the demographics that would traditionally be seen as with Democrats. And we should have taken it a lot. We, like the royal we, the family, should have taken it much more seriously in the cycle. And it also kind of explains, I think, why Elon is spending time in that universe and the way he's building out his narrative strategies right now.
Absolutely.
Jen, did you want to weigh in at all about this? Because, you've spent some time, obviously, through the digital and creator program looking at things like this. Did anything jump out to you?
No, I mean it pretty well tracks what we've been aware of in terms of the trends. Um, I guess on our poll, our immediate post-election poll, it looked a little different on TikTok, but I think that was partially because um it was different before the election. I mean, as
Mhm.
we all know, when Trump took over, the owners of TikTok started acting really differently. And so I do think it makes sense that there's more Republican kind of leaning people finding their news on TikTok now. Whereas last year when Biden was president and the lead up to the election, what we found in our battleground polling was that people who were watching TikTok actually were more favorable toward Harris at that time. So that has been a bit of a shift. But I think yeah. And then I do see the third party threads on TikTok. It also tracks with the data point we saw earlier, which we didn't dive into too much, but the fact that we asked these skippers who they would have voted for among younger under 30 voters, they chose third party much more prevalently than other groups. So it would track that. I mean, young people are so much more heavily watching TikTok. So that that data point also made sense to me. But I agree that the kind of dominant of long form content in YouTube is definitely troubling and something we have to get in front of.
And didn't y'all say, I mean, just to point out the very small numbers in the podcast column that we think maybe people are conflating podcast and YouTube, that some of the influencers
Yeah.
or creators themselves are, it's like the same
Yeah, I think that's
programming.
right.
All right.
And we're launching our new YouTube feature next. No, I'm just kidding. We may do that. I mean, Dan actually does get on YouTube and do some stuff, but we do not have a high presence right now on YouTube. All right, so it says someone who has a face for radio and a voice for TV right here. So anyway, um, all right, we touched on this earlier, but I did want to get back to it because Celinda found it kind of interesting when we were doing the briefing. Um, we talked about this slide where there was a sort of a clear path, the affordable health care for the skippers really prioritized affordable health care for those who need it as their number one issue, and followed closely by strengthening enforcement against tax cheats and making the wealthy pay what they owe. That was the number two issue for them. Celinda, will you just talk a little bit about these issues? And in particular, I think you said that you felt like the tax cheat thing popped more than you had seen it. Something about the way we asked this question seemed to raise the salience, and you found that interesting, and we wanted to hear a little bit more about it.
So I think there's a really strong affordability agenda here. And look at these numbers. I mean, these numbers are more popular than MAGA Republicans. They are not just with this population, but with voters nationwide, more popular than Trump, more popular than every Republican in Congress who's opposing these things. These are so strong. They're almost core values with these voters. Healthcare is really, really a top issue, and it remains one of the top issues that we still have an advantage on, even when people were discouraged. I love this idea of using language. I mean, Trump has gone from an eighth grade education level and talking to a fifth grade education level and talking. And what I love about this language, which came from you all, is that it employs the way people think about it and casually talk about it to their friends. It has a solution. It's cracking down. It's being specific on how we're going to do things. So, strengthening enforcement against wealthy tax cheats and making the wealthy pay what they owe in taxes. So, we're not talking about increased taxes for fairness, and that tests very well, but this tests off the charts. And if you couple these things together with affordable health care and strengthening enforcement against tax cheats and the wealthy who are not paying what they owe, that is really, really strong for people. I would also add that taxes in general, people are worried about. and bringing prices back down, eliminating price gouging and junk fees. And one of the things that I love about the way that all of these proposals are framed is they're framed in discussion in a way that affects real people's lives, kitchen table talk. It's not about GDP. It's not about inflation rates. It's about the way that people think about something, a junk fee, a price gouging, a tax cheat, and being able to get the health care you need
Yeah.
and being able to count on it.
Okay. That covers that slide really well. Thank you for that. I tell you what, I think we're getting pretty close to closing thoughts here. I wanted to open up the floor. I mean, I could frankly pull up any one of these slides and just listen to Celinda Lake elaborate on it and go, "Oh, I've learned something again." So, Celinda, I want to just make an offer to you to pick out any slide that you found, really interesting, and we can maybe edit it in later, but maybe you just give us enough detail that we don't need it. Most people listen anyways, so um, feel free.
Well, my favorite slide is our winning message
Mhm.
because I think it puts it all together, which is, and our winning message is overtly the fighter message. It talks about being strong as a party and strong on behalf of people. It pushes back against the Trump administration. It talks about the president and his rich friends, again, talking about that common language, the way real people talk about it. It talks about clear affordability and costs. It talks about uniting people. And one of the things I love that we haven't talked about yet is the strongest messages were inclusive. And our absolute strongest message with these Biden splitters was regardless of race, class, or zip code, people really responded to that notion of we're all in this together. And they often hear Democrats as well as Republicans talking to elites, talking to their donors, talking to the wealthy 1%. So I love the fact that the strongest message, and we didn't put our fingers on the scale, and this is a very strong message. This is 13 points higher than what we would think of as an acceptable message, that Democrats as fighters against a rigged economy, economic system, and fighting on behalf of an inclusive group of hardworking people and fighting for those people, not just talking about those people.
Okay. That's Jen, that's right in your wheelhouse. I can't help but just ask you if you want to elaborate at all before we bring it to a close here.
Oh yeah, I agree. I think it was good that we brought in the messaging because because I think there is a fair amount to learn from the messages that tested well with this group. Not just the fighting, but definitely like the particular stance of an opposition party that's pushing against the Trump administration. That's
Mhm.
really what these skippers want. They don't want to be taken for granted. They want an opposition party, a real opposition party that is going to stand up for the things that they care about. And so I think that was really important. I also thought the bringing in the kind of story of COVID that tested well in here was interesting because we often forget about COVID, but I think one of the things that struck me when we were listening to these skippers in the focus groups was how many of them brought up COVID. And it was kind of because we had asked them, how did you feel about 2020 compared to 2024? And their thought process, a lot of it centered and oriented around COVID and the challenges that they had in COVID and the challenges that they had feeling like COVID was a window into a kind of society we could have that then just got completely stripped away and we went all the way back to normal, and that Biden was kind of a part of that. They didn't feel the difference after having gone through that. Many of these working class folks were essential workers who were forced to work throughout the whole time, and they feel burned by that. And so it does get back to that message we talked about around they want a disruption of the system, but framing the story in that sort of reminding people that this was part of coming out of COVID also tested well, and that was interesting to me. Tori, what about you? Was there anything from the messaging that struck you that we
I
talked about?
do want to just like draw another line towards the blame the left is just not what's important to them right now.
Right.
So for like the amount of energy that is spent on, there was like a whole quarter, if not 2 quarters worth of time, research, words, op-eds, podcasts, where Democratic or Democratic aligned spokespeople really wanted to say, wow, did the left go too far on fill in the blank? And I think that it's just not what's important to voters. And it may be what's important to an elite class who's a little scared about taxes. Um, but my gosh, like if we don't reconcile this question, we're gonna be if we don't reconcile this question, and I'm gonna put a fine point on the we here. It's like the left and the center, then we're going to allow the far right, which is legitimately an anti-Semitic, fascist, neo-Nazi, white supremacist, xenophobic, misogynist far right continue to divide us. And that's a real problem. So, time for the family to come home here.
Amen.
Well, I was going to say, I absolutely cannot improve on that. So I think that is the place to leave it. And I want to thank you, Celinda, for
Thank
coming on.
you.
Yeah, it was great. I feel like we could do another hour with you. I'm just happy that our tech held up for the for what we've done here. Um, and Tory and Jenifer, I mean, truly, this is an illuminating poll. I was so excited to get it out there, talk about it. It's a hopeful discussion about a critical building block to 2026 and 2028. And I do think this profile of these voters, they are waiting to be persuaded, and they are persuadable, and they are reachable. We can reach them, right? It's kind of exciting. And I want to thank you to our listeners, of course, for being engaged in the work of rebuilding our democracy and making charting the way forward part of that whole conversation and that mission to do it. If you appreciate our work here, please tell a friend, recruit a new listener, rate and review us. I don't know, do something. Get your dog to listen. We all know that I like the dog, so we'll take them too. We'll take all the listeners. And with that, we will see you next Thursday. Until then, do good, be well, hug your loved ones, and tell your dog I say hi.
Ladies and gentlemen, leaders and fighters for freedom and liberty and the American dream.